When a 5-year-old boy was asked to explain one of history's most sacred stories, the world watched, divided between hope and outrage. As tensions rose, no one could have predicted the simple truth he would reveal, one that would silence millions. What did Elon Musk's young son say that stunned a nation into reflection? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The late afternoon sun poured gently through the wide windows of the Musk home, casting golden patches across the living room floor. At the center of the room, X sat cross-legged, building an elaborate rocket ship out of colorful blocks, humming to himself with quiet focus. The scene was peaceful, simple. A small boy dreaming of distant worlds, unaware that his own world was about to shift in a way he couldn't imagine. In the kitchen nearby, Elon Musk answered a call, his tone casual at first. "Hello, this is Elon." But as the voice on the other end continued, his expression changed. He straightened, listening intently. "You want my 5-year-old son to explain Holy Week on live television?" His voice was a mix of surprise and skepticism. He glanced over at X, still happily assembling his rocket without a care. Covering the phone with his hand, Elon called out, "X, come here a second." X scampered over, curiosity flashing in his wide eyes. Elon knelt to his level. "A TV show wants you to tell the story of Holy Week. It's a very important story for many people. Millions could be watching. Are you sure you want to try?" X's face lit up like the morning star. "Yes, please, Daddy. I'll learn everything, I promise." Elon hesitated, weighing the gravity of the invitation. This wasn't about rockets or cars. It was about faith, about a story that touched hearts for generations. After a long pause, he gave a small, reluctant nod. "All right, buddy. But we'll have to work hard and learn it the right way." And with that, a quiet afternoon turned into the first step of a journey that would soon capture the attention and the emotions of an entire nation. The next morning, their home took on a new energy. Ms. Reynolds, a kind-eyed Sunday school teacher with decades of experience, arrived carrying a bag filled with colorful books, picture cards, and small props. X, bouncing with excitement, sat eagerly at the dining room table, ready for his first lesson. Elon lingered nearby, arms crossed, pretending to check his phone but listening closely. Miss Reynolds opened a bright picture Bible and began simply. "Holy Week is the story of Jesus' last week on earth," she explained gently. X's face scrunched in concentration. After a moment, he raised his hand. "Who's Jesus?" he asked earnestly. Miss Reynolds smiled warmly. "Jesus was a teacher who loved everyone and helped people no one else cared about." X nodded slowly, then asked, "If he loved everyone, why would anyone want to hurt him?" The question hung in the air. Elon glanced up sharply, sensing that this was already becoming something deeper than a child's assignment. Across town in a polished studio, TV producers adjusted their scripts and set designs, sensing the buzz building. They had hoped for a sweet, innocent moment. What they might get, they now realized, was something far more profound and far more powerful. Elon Musk had never believed in handing his children ready-made answers. From the moment X could talk, his home had been filled with questions, hundreds of them. Why do stars shine? What happens when we die? What is love? Elon had always encouraged curiosity, pushing his son to explore big ideas without forcing him into any particular belief system. To Elon, real understanding wasn't about memorizing facts or traditions. It was about the willingness to ask why, even when answers were hard to find. As X grew, his questions only deepened. He wanted to know not just how the world worked, but why people cared, loved, and hoped. Now, with the opportunity to explain the story of Holy Week to millions, those innocent questions took on a new weight. Elon didn't want to interfere. He hoped, quietly, that X would find his own understanding, shaped by sincerity rather than pressure. Meanwhile, outside their quiet home, forces beyond their control were gathering. News of X's upcoming appearance spread quickly. Some celebrated the idea, a fresh perspective from a child untarnished by adult debates. Others were skeptical, worried that a non-religious boy might miss the sacred depth of the story. Social media platforms buzzed with arguments, hashtags trended, and commentators weighed in on national news. Faith leaders were split. Some expressed cautious optimism, believing the pure-hearted view of a child could cut through centuries of division. Others feared misrepresentation of sacred truths. Elon watched the storm quietly, determined not to let public opinion shape his son's journey. X's task wasn't to preach or to debate. It was to learn, to listen, and to speak from the heart. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. Every afternoon, the Musk home became a classroom. X sat at the dining table with Ms. Reynolds, his small hands carefully arranging colorful picture cards that mapped the journey of Holy Week. Each card was a milestone: Palm Sunday with its waving branches, Holy Monday's cleansing of the temple, Spy Wednesday and Judas's betrayal, and the somber gravity of Good Friday. Ms. Reynolds spoke with patience, using simple words that framed deep, ancient truths in a way a 5-year-old could grasp. To everyone's surprise, X didn't just memorize the story, he lived inside it. When explaining Palm Sunday, he didn't just say Jesus rode into Jerusalem. He described the sound of the crowd, the feeling of excitement, and how the palm branches were laid down like soft green carpets. He called Holy Monday the day Jesus got really mad but for the right reasons, and he summarized Spy Wednesday with a frown, explaining Judas forgot how much Jesus loved him. His innocent, heartfelt explanations started to ripple outward. Word spread that the Musk boy might be doing more than just telling a children's version of Holy Week. He might actually be touching something deeper. Skepticism still lingered, especially among local pastors and church elders who felt protective over the sacredness of the season. One afternoon, 3 of them arrived at Elon's home, politely but firmly asking to meet with X. Elon welcomed them, understanding their concerns but standing by his son's chance to share. In the living room, surrounded by picture cards and storybooks, X sat with his legs swinging off a chair, completely unfazed by the stern visitors. "Can you tell us why Holy Week is important?" one elder asked, his voice gentle but cautious. X nodded seriously. "It's about love," he said plainly. "Jesus loved people so much he was willing to die for them, and then he came back to show that love is stronger than death." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. For a moment, no one spoke. One of the elders shifted in his seat, his face softening. "And what does that mean to you?" asked another pastor, leaning forward. X thought carefully. "It means that even when bad things happen, love wins. Even when people do bad stuff, love is bigger." Elon watched silently from the doorway, feeling a swell of emotion he hadn't anticipated. The pastors exchanged glances. Whatever doubts they had about whether a 5-year-old could carry such a sacred story to the public, they were hearing firsthand something pure, something unfiltered. When the visit ended, the elders offered polite thanks. One even knelt down to tell X, "You've reminded me why I first believed in this story." Elon smiled faintly, but knew the tensions outside the walls of their home were far from settled. Across town, and increasingly across the country, the conversation was heating up. Some hailed X as a breath of fresh air. Others worried about a child being placed at the center of such a sensitive story. Online debates grew fiercer by the hour, with faith leaders and commentators taking sides. Inside their home, however, Elon and X remained focused. This wasn't about winning an argument or surviving controversy. It was about a child learning to tell a story of love, sacrifice, and hope in a world that desperately needed it. By Wednesday afternoon, the story had escaped the quiet walls of the Musk home and exploded into national headlines. News outlets across the country ran bold banners. 5-year-old son of Elon Musk to explain Holy Week. The media frenzy spun fast. Some praised it as a refreshing idea, others attacked it fiercely. Commentators debated whether a child from a non-religious background should present something so sacred to millions. The conversations grew louder, angrier, more divided. Outside the network headquarters, protests began to form. A small but vocal group held signs that read, "Respect Holy Week," and "Sacred stories need sacred voices." Across the street, counter-protesters appeared, holding candles and posters that simply said, "Let the children speak." Inside his home, X remained blissfully unaware of the firestorm brewing. He spent his days focused entirely on his mission, learning the story and learning it well. Each morning he practiced with Ms. Reynolds, moving through the events of Holy Week as carefully as a young scientist conducting a critical experiment. His small voice was steady as he rehearsed. Palm Sunday, Holy Monday, Spy Wednesday, Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, Holy Saturday, Easter Sunday. Fan mail began arriving in bundles. Letters and drawings from children across the country flooded the Musk residence. Some showed colorful palm branches. Others sketched Jesus on a donkey or sitting with children. Many came with simple, heartfelt messages. "Good luck, X," or "We believe in you." Elon watched X spread the letters out across the floor, reading them with wide-eyed. One letter stood out, a hand-drawn picture of a cross surrounded by tiny hearts. In the child's handwriting it read, "Thank you for telling everyone about love." Elon felt the weight pressing on his chest. It wasn't the criticism from religious leaders or the angry headlines that shook him. It was the question of whether he was doing the right thing for his son. Was this too much to ask of a 5-year-old? Was it fair to let X stand in a spotlight that had turned so fiercely bright, so unpredictably hot? Late that evening, Elon sat alone in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee gone cold. His phone buzzed repeatedly. New messages, more news alerts, another call from the producer reminding him of security measures. He rubbed his forehead, staring out the window into the dark. He had always promised himself he would protect X, not push him. And yet there was no denying it. X wanted this, not for fame, not for applause, but because he believed the story mattered. It was something pure and earnest. That realization gnawed at Elon even more. Was it wiser to shield X from the noise, or to honor the very courage and honesty he had taught his son to value? From down the hall, X's voice carried faintly. He was still practicing with Ms. Reynolds, his small words clear and full of conviction. Jesus loved people so much, he gave everything to show it. Elon closed his eyes, breathing in the sound. In a world so divided, maybe it took a child to remind everyone what faith and sacrifice really meant. Maybe it wasn't about perfection. Maybe it was about sincerity, about the effort to tell a story of love, even when the world was determined to argue. He opened his eyes and made a decision. They would go forward, together. The decision came early Sunday morning. Due to escalating security threats, the network executives made the call. X's broadcast would not happen from home as planned. It would instead take place inside a neutral location, a nearby church known for bringing communities together across religious divides. It wasn't ideal, but it was safe. When Elon explained the change to X, the boy tilted his head in thought. "A church? Like the ones with the big windows?" he asked. Elon smiled, ruffling his son's hair. Exactly like that. Later that afternoon, they drove quietly to the Faith Community Church, the new broadcast site. As they pulled into the parking lot, Elon noticed something he hadn't expected. A gathering of people, hundreds already, holding candles despite the bright afternoon sun. They lined the sidewalks, peaceful and reverent, forming a living wall of light around the church. X stared in wonder. Are they here for me? Elon's voice caught slightly before he answered. They're here for something bigger, buddy. They're here for hope. Inside, the sanctuary was breathtaking. The vaulted ceilings soared high above, and sunlight streamed through tall stained glass windows, painting the wooden pews with vibrant colors. Each panel depicted scenes from the Holy Week story that X had spent days learning. Jesus riding the donkey into Jerusalem, the Last Supper, the Garden of Gethsemane, the crucifixion, and finally the empty tomb. X walked slowly down the aisle, his sneakers barely making a sound on the polished floor. He paused before each window, studying the familiar stories now alive in radiant glass. At the foot of the altar, a simple wooden cross stood draped in a deep purple cloth, the traditional sign of mourning before Easter's joy. Elon watched his son from a few steps behind, feeling the heaviness of the moment settle around him. This wasn't just about telling a story anymore. This was about standing in a place sacred to millions, carrying a message that cut deeper than any argument or controversy. Mrs. Reynolds met them at the front, her eyes shining with quiet pride. She knelt down to X's level. "Are you ready, sweetheart?" she asked softly. X looked up at the towering windows one more time, then turned to his father. His small hand slipped into Elon's larger one, and he squeezed tightly. "I won't let anyone down, Daddy," he said, his voice steady and sure. Elon knelt, bringing them eye to eye. He placed both hands on X's small shoulders. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be yourself. That's enough." X nodded solemnly. Outside, the candlelight vigil was growing. More cars filled the streets, more candles were passed from hand to hand. It wasn't a protest anymore. It was a prayer, a silent hope that something pure could cut through the noise, even for just a moment. Inside the sanctuary, final preparations were underway. Cameramen moved softly between the pews. Technicians whispered into headsets. Elon watched the bustle around them, but his focus never left his son. In X's wide eyes there was no fear, only a simple determination that defied his age, as if he somehow understood that what he was about to do was not about performance, but about heart. Elon realized then, whatever happened during the broadcast, X had already done something extraordinary. Without shouting, without arguing, without even realizing it, he had stirred a nation's divided spirit into remembering something older, deeper, and truer. The simple, world-changing power of love. The final rehearsal began under the soft light of the stained glass windows. The church sanctuary had been carefully prepared, a small podium placed at the front, with cameras arranged discreetly to capture the moment without overwhelming it. X stood behind the podium, his hands resting lightly on the wood, while Elon and Ms. Reynolds watched from a pew nearby. The producer, Ms. Winters, gently guided X through a mock interview, tossing him questions that would likely come up during the broadcast. "What's Palm Sunday?" she asked. X beamed. "That's when Jesus rode a donkey and people waved palm branches because they thought he was special." The crew smiled. Ms. Winters nodded encouragingly and pressed a little deeper. "Why do you think Jesus let himself get arrested instead of running away?" X thought for a moment, then said, "Because he loved people more than he loved being safe." The room grew still. Technicians behind cameras exchanged glances. It was not the answer of a rehearsed child parroting facts. It was something real, something felt. Then came the hardest question. Ms. Winters leaned in. "Why do you think Judas betrayed Jesus?" A hush fell over the sanctuary. Even Elon found himself holding his breath. X's brow furrowed as he spoke carefully. "Ms. Reynolds says Judas was disappointed because Jesus didn't fight the bad guys the way he wanted. Maybe sometimes people get scared when they don't understand love." There was a long silence after his words. A cameraman wiped his eyes. Ms. Reynolds pressed her hand to her heart. Even Ms. Winters, a seasoned producer used to the chaos of live television, found herself blinking back tears. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't polished. It was the raw, unfiltered truth from the heart of a child. Mrs. Reynolds whispered to Elon, "Maybe what adults need isn't another perfect sermon. Maybe what we need is the honesty of a child." Outside the church, the candlelight vigil continued to grow, now wrapping around the entire block. News crews, originally there to cover controversy, began capturing something very different. Strangers holding hands, offering prayers, lighting candles not in protest, but in hope. On social media, a new narrative was beginning to spread. Early video snippets leaked from rehearsal showed X's pure-hearted answers. Posts flooded timelines. "A 5-year-old just explained Holy Week better than any theologian I've ever heard." Another read, "Maybe we all needed to be reminded what faith looks like, through the eyes of a child." The division that had once fueled debate was now melting into something stronger. Across the country, churches, families, and even skeptics were beginning to share the same small clips, the same simple truth. A little boy who didn't set out to impress anyone, but who spoke with a sincerity that even hardened hearts couldn't ignore. Elon watched all of this unfold quietly, marveling at how a few simple words, spoken without agenda, without fear, had begun to ripple outward in ways none of them could have planned. And tomorrow, when the cameras went live, the world would hear it for themselves. The night before the broadcast, the air outside Faith Community Church was cool and still. The glow of hundreds of candles flickered gently against the evening sky. X stood at the edge of the church steps, holding tightly to a small wooden cross Ms. Reynolds had given him. Beside him, Elon stood silently, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, his gaze sweeping over the vigil that had grown beyond anything he had imagined. People stood shoulder to shoulder, strangers now united in quiet hope. Some sang softly, others prayed, but most simply watched the candles sway in the night breeze. It was peaceful, almost sacred. Elon looked down at X, who was staring intently at the sea of light before him. "You know," Elon said quietly, "sometimes it's not about saying everything perfectly. It's about speaking from the heart. That's what matters most." X turned to him, his wide eyes reflecting the candlelight. He nodded solemnly and clutched the little cross tighter in his small hands, as if drawing courage from it. There was no fear in his face now, only a deep, childlike resolve. Satisfied, Elon gave a small smile. He reached out and rested a hand gently on X's shoulder. Together they turned and began the walk back home. Above them, the night sky stretched out endlessly, scattered with 1,000 stars. Their steps were slow and unhurried, the peacefulness of the moment wrapping around them like a warm blanket. Elon felt a quiet sense of peace settle deep in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring. But tonight, under the stars with his son by his side, he knew that whatever happened, they had already done something important. Something real. The next morning, the sunlight streamed softly through the stained glass windows of Faith Community Church, casting colorful patterns across the floor. X stood quietly at the front of the sanctuary, a small palm branch clutched carefully in his hand. His little suit was slightly wrinkled from the nerves of the morning, but his eyes were calm, steady, and full of quiet determination. Around him, the church buzzed with gentle anticipation. Cameras were positioned, microphones were ready. Across the nation, millions of people waited, not for a grand speech, but for the simple, honest voice of a 5-year-old boy who had worked so hard to understand a story that stretched back through centuries. As he waited for his cue, X shifted his grip on the palm branch, taking a small breath. In that moment, the weight of controversy, expectation, and media frenzy faded away. What remained was something pure, a child standing in truth, ready to share from the heart. The voiceover echoed gently, tying the scene together. Sometimes, the purest truths are entrusted not to the powerful, but to the pure-hearted. If this inspiring story touched your heart, subscribe now for more powerful journeys of faith, courage, and the enduring strength of love.